touch that gazebo, and I'll have every one of you fired.
The HOA president stood in front of the city excavator like shouting could stop 6 tons of steel. The public works supervisor barely looked at her. He pointed at the broken concrete beneath her feet. "That manhole is active city access. Move." I stayed silent. I had warned her 3 months earlier, in writing. Then the excavator bucket dropped. But the gazebo was only the first thing the city uncovered that afternoon. The second was Karen's lie. 3 months earlier, the HOA announced what Karen called its most important beautification project in years. A covered gazebo, stone patio, decorative lighting, new landscaping, and enough polished photos to fill 3 HOA newsletters. Normally, I would not have cared. I was not even a member of their HOA. My house sat beside the common green, but my property had been there before the association existed. If they wanted to spend their own money building somewhere to drink coffee and hold board meetings, that was their business. Then I saw where they were putting it. I had spent 32 years working around municipal utilities before I retired. Most of my career was not glamorous. Storm drains, sewer access, water lines, inspection chambers, emergency repairs, and a lot of nights standing beside holes in the ground while everyone else was asleep. That kind of work teaches you to notice things other people ignore. Years earlier, I had been called to a sewer emergency, where a blocked access point turned a manageable repair into an entire night of flooded basements. I still remembered the smell. I remembered families standing outside their homes at 2 in the morning while crews searched for a way into the line. So when I saw the construction stakes on the HOA green, one thing immediately bothered me. Sitting almost dead center inside the proposed patio was a heavy iron cover, about 3 feet across, weathered, half hidden by grass. Most residents probably had no idea it was there. I did. The contractor's foreman was spraying layout marks when I walked over. I asked whether Public Works had cleared the access point. He looked down at the cover. "That thing?" "Yes." He shrugged. "HOA says it is an old septic cover, abandoned years ago." That answer bothered me. Not because I knew for certain he was wrong, because he clearly did not know he was right. Before I could ask anything else, Karen came across the grass with a rolled set of plans under one arm. She had been HOA president for 4 years, and that summer she was running again. The gazebo was her signature project. The annual neighborhood showcase was coming up, followed not long after by the board election. Her name was already attached to the project in newsletters. Karen's Community Green Renovation. She had promised residents it would be finished before the showcase, so when I asked about the iron cover, I was not just questioning a construction detail. I was questioning the project she had spent months attaching to herself. She told me it had already been handled. I looked down. "Do you have that in writing?" Her expression changed. She was not angry. She was amused. "Richard, these are licensed contractors." "I know. They do not need a retired maintenance guy supervising them. I am not supervising anybody." "Then stop acting like it." I could have argued. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I took one photo of the iron cover, one photo of the construction stakes around it, one photo of the markings crossing directly over it. Karen watched me. "You are really taking pictures now? Just documenting?" She laughed. Then she walked away. I went home and pulled up the public subdivision records. There was a utility corridor running almost exactly through the proposed gazebo site. Then I checked the municipal infrastructure map. That was when I found the notation: sanitary sewer access. The symbol sat almost directly beneath the planned patio. I stared at it for a while. Maybe the record was old. Maybe the access point had been abandoned properly. That was possible. And if Karen was right, one phone call to Public Works could prove it. But if she was wrong, they were about to put permanent construction over infrastructure the city might need in an emergency. I printed the map. Then I wrote an email. At the time, I thought that email might stop a bad decision. I had no idea Karen would eventually deny receiving the very warning sitting in my sent folder. I kept the message boring on purpose. No threats, no accusations, no lecture about my career. I attached the utility map, marked the location of the iron cover, and explained that the proposed gazebo appeared to overlap municipal sanitary sewer access. Then I asked the HOA to verify the location with Public Works before pouring permanent concrete. That was it. Karen replied 43 minutes later. "Richard, our licensed professionals have already reviewed the site. Please stop interfering with HOA improvements." I read it twice. Then I saved it. The next morning, I sent one more email. I told her she did not have to trust my experience. She did not even have to agree with me. All I was asking was that someone call Public Works and confirm the status of the cover before construction continued. No response. By noon, pallets of pavers were being delivered. 2 days later, rebar arrived. That was when I created a folder on my computer. I called it Gazebo Sewer Access. Every photo went into it. Every email, every date, every construction milestone. I saved the HOA newsletter too. That month's issue praised Karen for personally streamlining project approvals so construction would be finished before the neighborhood showcase. That word caught my attention. Streamlining. Sometimes streamlining means removing wasted time. Sometimes it means removing the one boring step that existed for a reason. The following Friday, I saw the foreman beside his truck. I walked over. Did anyone from Public Works verify that cover? This time he did not shrug. He looked toward Karen's white SUV, then back at me. "We build what the client approves." That was not my question. His jaw tightened. Before he answered, Karen's voice came from behind us. "You have been told twice." She walked straight toward me. "This project is approved. I am asking if the sewer access was verified." "It is not sewer access." "You called the city?" She smiled. "Some of us know when to let professionals do their jobs." Then she turned to the foreman. "Proceed." One word. I remembered it. I wrote down the date, the time, and everyone standing there. I did not yell. I did not stand in front of the equipment. I did not threaten to sue anyone. I had warned them in writing, twice. And if Karen truly believed that iron cover was abandoned, there was one easy way to prove it. Make one phone call. She never did. Monday morning, the concrete truck arrived. Karen was already standing there waiting for it. The pour started just after 8. I watched from my side of the property line. The iron cover disappeared beneath gravel, forms, and concrete. No city vehicle arrived. Nobody stopped the crew. Karen took pictures. At one point, she posed with 2 board members while workers finished the slab behind them. By the end of the week, stone pavers covered the concrete. Then came the posts, roof beams, benches, planters, lights. Within a month, there was no visible sign that an iron access cover had ever existed there. Karen made sure everyone knew the project had been completed on schedule. The HOA newsletter called it a symbol of responsible community leadership. The photograph showed Karen standing beneath the finished roof with a ribbon in her hand. I saved that one too. A few days later, I saw the foreman loading tools into his truck. I asked one final question. "Who told you the cover was abandoned?" He stopped, only for a second. Then Karen spoke from behind us. "That is enough." She walked toward me. "You have made your point, Richard. Stay off HOA property and stop harassing our contractors." I looked at her, then at the gazebo, then back at her. Save that sentence. She laughed again. After that, I stopped asking questions. The gazebo opened. Residents drank coffee there. Kids sat on the benches. Karen gave a speech about property values, community pride, and delivering promises. For several weeks, absolutely nothing happened. That was probably the worst thing that could have happened to her. Every quiet day convinced her she had been right. Then one evening, while I was taking out the trash, I caught a familiar smell near the property line. Faint, sulfurous. Most people would have blamed wet ground. I did not. I had smelled that odor too many times during my career. I walked the edge of my property but did not touch anything. 2 days later, a neighbor mentioned that his kitchen sink had started draining slowly. The next morning, another resident said her downstairs toilet was making a bubbling sound. Then a third house reported water pushing back through a basement drain. The HOA sent out a notice blaming residents for improper disposal. It reminded homeowners not to flush wipes, grease, or foreign material. I read the notice twice. Then I looked across the grass at Karen's gazebo. I was not thinking about revenge. I was remembering that night years earlier when families stood outside flooded homes because a crew could not reach the place it needed to reach. So I picked up the phone. I called Public Works. The dispatcher listened while I explained the symptoms and what had been built over the old access point. Then she asked one question. "Do you know where the nearest sewer access point is?" I looked straight at the gazebo. I know exactly where it used to be. Public Works did not send an excavator first. They sent 2 inspectors. That mattered. Nobody knew yet whether the problem was a residential lateral, a restriction farther down the main, or something completely unrelated. The first city truck arrived just after 9 the next morning. Karen was outside before they had finished parking. "This is private HOA property. What exactly are you doing here?" One worker held up a tablet. "We received a sewer complaint. We already addressed that." "How?" "We notified residents about improper disposal." The worker did not react. He checked his map. "Where is the nearest access point?" Karen pointed toward the street. "There is one farther down." He studied the tablet again. "No, there should be another one here." "There is not." I walked over from my side of the property. "I have a photo." Karen turned toward me. "Oh, of course you do." I ignored her. I showed the worker the picture from before construction. The iron cover. The stakes. The exact location. His expression changed. "Where is this now?" I pointed at the center of the patio. "Under there." Karen stopped talking. The worker zoomed into his map and made a call. 20 minutes later, a second city truck arrived. This one carried locating equipment. They traced the main, marked the grass, marked the edge of the patio. Then one technician stopped beside the gazebo. The locator gave him a strong signal. The supervisor looked down. "Structure number? MH17. Karen gave a short laugh. That was an abandoned septic cover. The supervisor looked at her. "Who told you that?" "Our contractor." That answer mattered. It was the first time she moved responsibility away from herself. The supervisor checked his tablet again. MH17 is active municipal sewer access. Karen's face tightened. That cannot be right. It is. She pointed at the gazebo. This structure belongs to the HOA. You cannot damage it. The supervisor asked her one question. Do you have written authorization to obstruct municipal access? Karen said nothing. He waited. Still nothing. Then he stepped away and made a phone call. That was when I knew the argument had ended. The city had moved into procedure, and procedure was the thing Karen had spent 3 months pretending she controlled. By early afternoon, 3 city vehicles were parked along the curb. Residents started coming outside. Karen tried to control the story. She told neighbors it was a minor infrastructure review. Then she reminded the city that the gazebo had been approved. Then she called someone connected to the HOA's legal counsel. None of it moved, MH17. It was still underneath the patio. The supervisor asked me to send him the photographs. I emailed them. Then he asked when I had first warned the association. I gave him the date, Karen interrupted. He has been sending unsolicited complaints about this project from the beginning. The supervisor looked at me. Do you still have the emails? Every one. Karen's jaw tightened. He did not ask for them yet. Instead, the crew attempted a camera inspection from another access point farther down the line. Several workers gathered around a monitor. I could not see the screen, but I could see their faces. Something had changed. One technician said they were not getting through cleanly. The supervisor asked how far. The technician gave him a distance. The supervisor looked back at the gazebo. That was when the mood changed. This was no longer about locating an inconvenient manhole. They needed access to it. Karen still thought everything was negotiable. If you need to schedule work, coordinate it with the board. We have events booked here. The supervisor stared at her. We have sewage backing into homes. That does not give you permission to destroy HOA property. No. He pointed at the patio. The blocked municipal access does. Then he reached for his radio. The request was short. Equipment. Immediate access. About 40 minutes later, diesel engines echoed from the end of the street. Heads turned. A flatbed came around the corner. On it sat a city excavator. Karen's expression changed before the machine even came off the trailer. For the first time, she looked at me like she finally understood why I had asked her to make that phone call 3 months earlier. Then she stepped directly into the work area. You are not touching that gazebo. The operator stopped. The public works supervisor walked toward her. This project was approved by the HOA, Karen said. If you damage one piece of it, I will have every one of you reported. He did not raise his voice. That manhole is active city access. Move. Karen stayed where she was. Then she pointed directly at me. This is his fault. He has been trying to sabotage this project since day one. Everyone looked toward me. I said nothing. I did not need to. The city had its map, its locator marks, its structure number, and I had every email. The supervisor pointed toward the safety line. Move. Karen refused again. A crew member stepped closer. Ma'am, clear the work zone. Something in his voice finally got through to her. She stepped back. The excavator moved forward. The first strike caught the decorative railing. Wood snapped. A section folded inward. The second pass took one of the support posts. The roof sagged. Residents across the street lifted their phones. Then the bucket tore through the side of the gazebo. White beams crashed onto the patio. Planters split open. Pavers shifted. The project Karen had spent months attaching her name to was coming apart piece by piece. I did not smile. I had never wanted this. I had wanted someone to make one phone call before the concrete arrived. The excavator cleared the remaining structure. Then it began peeling back the patio. Pavers first, then concrete, then compacted base material. Finally, the top of MH17 appeared. One worker moved closer. He brushed away loose material. His posture changed immediately. His hand went up. Stop. The excavator froze. The supervisor walked over and crouched beside the opening. The worker pointed at the upper section. The supervisor stared for several seconds. Then he stood. Everybody back. Karen looked at him. What now? He did not answer immediately. The gazebo was already gone. But the city had just found something that made the destroyed gazebo look like the easy part. A worker climbed down with a flashlight. Another brought over a camera. Karen kept asking what was wrong. Nobody answered her. For 3 months, every question had been met with one of Karen's instant answers. Now she stood behind a safety line while people who actually understood the system examined what had been buried. The worker called up. The upper ring is cracked and shifted. The supervisor crouched down again. Can you open it safely? Not until we clear the load around it and inspect the riser. Karen stepped closer. What does that mean? The supervisor looked at her. It means you did not just cover the access point. The compacted base and construction around the opening had pushed part of the upper assembly out of position. The city still did not know whether the sewer main itself had been damaged, but they did know one thing. They could not simply lift the lid and begin normal service. The access structure had to be inspected and repaired first. The supervisor looked toward the contractor. Who authorized construction directly over this point? Karen answered before anyone else could. The contractor built it. The foreman was standing near his truck. He had heard her. We built from the site instructions we were given. Karen turned on him. You told me that lid was abandoned. The foreman shook his head. No, you told us it was abandoned. Nobody spoke. The residents watching from the curb went silent. The supervisor looked between them. Who told the contractor municipal access could be covered? Karen folded her arms. The board approved the gazebo. That was not my question. He pointed toward the open excavation. Who said this access point was abandoned? Karen looked at the contractor, then at me, then back at the supervisor. I was never informed that this was active municipal access. There it was. The lie. Not a misunderstanding, not a vague memory. A direct statement made in front of the city crew, the contractor, and half the neighborhood. I reached into my pocket and opened my phone. No speech. No victory smile. I opened the folder I had been keeping for 3 months. Then I found the first email. I think you should see this. The supervisor took my phone. He read the subject line. Municipal sewer access. Proposed gazebo site. Then he opened the attachment. The utility map. The marked location. My warning. The date. Then Karen's reply. Our licensed professionals have already reviewed the site. Please stop interfering with HOA improvements. The supervisor read it again. Then he looked at Karen. You received this before construction? Her face went still. It was an unsolicited opinion. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because even then, she was trying to make the warning sound like the problem. The supervisor opened my second email, the one asking her to contact Public Works directly. He forwarded both messages to his city address. Karen stepped forward. "You cannot take private HOA correspondence." He looked up. "You sent this to a resident regarding city infrastructure." Then he handed my phone back. "Risk management is going to want copies." Karen finally stopped talking, because the excavator had uncovered more than damaged access. It had uncovered a timeline, and the timeline showed that before the contractor poured 1 yard of concrete, someone had told Karen exactly what needed to be checked. The city had uncovered the manhole. My email had uncovered her. 2 nights later, the HOA called an emergency meeting. Karen tried to run it the same way she had run every meeting for 4 years. Agenda, prepared statement, folder in front of her. The usual language about protecting property values and acting in the best interests of the community. But the room felt different. The residents had seen the excavator. They had watched the gazebo come apart. Several of them had videos on their phones. And now they wanted to know why. Karen started by blaming the contractor. She said the board had relied on licensed professionals. Then she said municipal records had been unclear. Then she suggested I had deliberately escalated the situation because I had opposed her project from the beginning. One board member interrupted. "Did Richard warn you about the manhole before concrete was poured?" Karen paused. "He sent multiple complaints. That was not my question." The room went quiet. The board member held up a printed copy of my email. "This says municipal sewer access." Karen leaned back. "Richard is not a city engineer." Another board member spoke. He did not claim to be one. "He told you to call Public Works." Karen said nothing. The first member turned the page. "And you replied that the site had already been reviewed." Karen shifted in her chair. "I was relying on information provided to me." That was when the contractor's correspondence came out. After the city asked who had authorized the construction location, the company had preserved its instructions from the HOA. One line mattered more than anything else. The HOA had informed the contractor that the iron cover was abandoned and construction could proceed. That instruction came through Karen. No Public Works clearance was attached. No municipal utility verification. No document saying MH17 was abandoned. Nothing. A resident in the back of the room asked the simplest question of the night. "Did you ever actually call Public Works?" Karen looked toward the board attorney, then at the papers in front of her, then at the residents. She never answered. She did not need to. The answer was already in every document she could not produce. By then, the city had ordered the area around MH17 to remain accessible while the upper structure was repaired and the line was inspected. The gazebo was gone. The patio had been cut apart. The site needed restoration. The city wanted documentation. The contractor wanted its instructions preserved. The HOA's insurance carrier wanted copies of the project records. And suddenly Karen's favorite word was everywhere. Procedure. Only now, procedure was not protecting her. One board member closed his folder. "You told us this project had been cleared." Karen tried one final defense. "I told you the contractor had approved the work." "No." He looked straight at her. "You told us the site had been cleared." There was a difference. Everyone in that room understood it. And Karen understood something else. The gazebo had not just been a community project. It had been the centerpiece of her re-election campaign. Her newsletters had called it proof that she got things done. Now every photograph of that gazebo was being shared next to photographs of a city excavator tearing it apart. The board voted that night to remove Karen from oversight of all active construction projects, while the city and insurance review continued. The summer showcase went ahead without the gazebo. The election campaign did too. But Karen was no longer talking about community improvements. A month later, she resigned as HOA president. She called it politics. Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue about. The city eventually repaired the upper section of MH17 and restored full access. The investigation did not turn into some giant criminal case. It did not need to. The truth was simpler. A routine verification had been skipped. A warning had been dismissed. A permanent structure had been built where permanent construction should never have been placed. And when the system finally needed access, the mistake became visible to everyone. The HOA did not rebuild the gazebo. The area became a simple landscaped green. No permanent slab. No structure over the access point. The cover remained visible and clear. The board changed its construction rules too. Major common area projects now required written verification of underground utilities before approval. Residents could review project documentation before major work began. And no single board member could streamline away infrastructure clearance just to meet an event deadline. Some residents thought the new process was excessive. I did not. The entire disaster could have been prevented with one phone call. A few weeks after the last city truck left, one of my neighbors stopped me near the property line. He looked at the grass where the gazebo used to stand. Then he looked at me. "You knew they were going to tear it down, didn't you?" "No." He seemed surprised. I pointed toward the iron cover. "I knew they should not build over that. That is different." "Exactly. I never wanted Karen's gazebo destroyed. I never wanted sewage pushing into anyone's basement. And I did not want to spend 3 months saving emails about something that should have taken 5 minutes to verify. I warned her because I remembered what happens when crews cannot reach infrastructure during an emergency. I had seen families pay for mistakes they did not create. I did not want to watch that happen again after retirement. Karen thought my warning was about control. It was not. It was about access. She thought I was trying to prove that I knew more than she did. I was not. I was trying to get her to ask the one department that actually knew. She laughed because she thought questioning her authority was the same thing as being wrong. It was not. In the end, Karen did not lose to me. She lost to the map, the manhole, the contractor's records, her own email, and the sentence she told the city in front of everyone. I was never informed. The city had a timestamp that said otherwise. Karen thought a title, a contractor, and a truckload of concrete could make the problem disappear. For a while, it looked like she was right. The iron cover vanished. The patio went in. The gazebo went up. People drank coffee over it. Children sat beneath it. Karen posed for photographs beside it. Everyone called it progress. But concrete can hide a manhole. It cannot erase a municipal record. It cannot erase a contractor's instructions. And it cannot erase an email showing that you were warned before the first truck ever arrived. The excavator destroyed Karen's gazebo. But the excavator was not what ended her authority. The record did. Because fake authority works only while nobody checks the paperwork. Karen learned that while standing behind a safety line, watching city workers uncover everything she had insisted was not there. The manhole had been buried under concrete. The warning had been buried under her ego. Only one of them stayed buried. and the email she laughed at became the most expensive message that HOA ever ignored.